For the purposes of roll call, I'll note that Will Arnold from Davis, myself from Davis, Tom Stallard from Woodland, Rich Landsberg, our new board member from Woodland is here, and Camille Kirk from UC Davis are here. Our first item would be approval of agenda. Does anyone?
Moved.
Doesn't look like there's discussion needed on this. All those in favor of approval agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Why don't we move to public comment? Seeing none, we will move on to agency business. The first item on our agenda is a closed session, and I take it that we will have closed session. And so is the plan to retire into the conference room, or do we plan to hold that here? What is the preference of staff?
I was going to have it held here and out here into the.
Okay, if that works for you, that I'm sure works for us. Yes?
Unless you wanted me to.
I think we're happy just staying here. So why don't we move to that closed session item, and then we'll return as soon as that one's over. Welcome back to the open session of the Woodland-Davis Clean Water Agency Board of Directors meeting. We just completed item 1, closed session. There's nothing to report out of closed session. We'll be moving on to item 2, consent items, approval of the special meeting minutes, and the agenda item is to approve them, the meeting minutes as modified. There's been a slight modification, and
Move approval.
Okay.
Did you, Lynn-Ann, did you want to?
Sure, yes, I think this is on. Yes, I just wanted to clarify that there were 2 little mistakes on these minutes of October 18th, 2018 on page 1 and page 4. It should read Vice Chair Stallard and Director Davies on page 1 under the roll call. Instead, I had Vice Chair Davies and Director Stallard, so that will be reversed. And then on the last page 4, it should read Vice Chair Stallard.
Okay, thank you.
That's the only corrections.
And do I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Now we'll move on to item 3, the operations update.
Hi, good afternoon. Kind of a quick update of things that we've been working on over the past 3 months. Really 4 topics today. One of them is the joint intake completion project, supplemental water purchase agreement that we entered a few months ago, EPA climate resiliency tool. That's kind of a new thing. I think you've already seen that a little bit. And then the operations update. Joint intake completion project, that is an item on the agenda further down today. To actually close that project out. So we completed all the final punch list work in November of 2018. What that means is all the last little things that needed to be completed to sign off that the contractor has completed every aspect of that work. That was achieved in November. We did do a change order with the contractor in November to add erosion control blankets on the levee slopes, both on the Sacramento River and also on the RD 2035 canal. That was not part of the original bid package. But given that the slopes have the levee slopes have a slope of 3 feet horizontal to every 1 foot vertical, it's a pretty steep slope. With rains coming in, our thinking was that it would wash a lot of the landscaping seed away, and we would end up with levee slopes that did not grow anything. So we added some erosion control blankets in November. We do have the as-built drawings by the contractor, and West US is working to finish the record drawings for the project. We should have that done probably the next week or so. We do have the final pay application from the contractor. All the change orders have been resolved, so we're ready to go and pay that contract out. As I mentioned before, it is on the agenda today for the Down to accept the project and allow release of retention. We are also working on environmental permit closeout, and I'll talk about that a little bit further down as well. We have about 8 permits on the project, ranging from our more typical erosion control permit that we have on almost every project, but also Central Valley Flood Protection Board permit for work on the Sacramento River levee system itself. That permit has about 58 different conditions we need to meet. Most of them are done. There's about 4 remaining that we're working on finishing up, and one of them is waiting for the grass to grow. Actually, all the permits we have require revegetation to occur prior to closing the permits out. So we're basically done with the project entirely, other than waiting for grass to grow. So I do have some pictures of that coming up. In terms of final numbers for the project, the original project was awarded at $1.276 million back a little over a year ago. And we had 5 change orders, or really 4 of them are actually construction-related change orders. And they included several different things. We did ultimately add more rock slope protection on both the Sacramento River levee slope and also the RD 2035 canal slope over what was in the plans, mainly to protect both of the levee slopes from erosion as required by our Central Valley Flood Protection Board permit. We did add some boulders on top of the levee itself next to the intake. We did that because as soon as we rebuilt the levee and rebuilt the road, County Road 117, we noticed that people were starting to drive trucks and ATVs from County Road 117 onto RD 1600's levee and doing some damage further down. So it was actually a request of RD 1600 and our own operations people that requested that we block that off. And since it is a federal and state project levee, we're not allowed to put fencing in. You're not allowed to drill fence posts down into that levee. But we are allowed to put boulders down. So we put giant 2-foot diameter rocks every 3 feet on center along the entire accessible portion of that levee. We did also find a concrete wall that was installed in 1910 when the original intake went in, buried in the middle of the levee. Per Central Valley Flood Protection Board regulations, you're not allowed to have something like that in a levee. Because we found it, we had to pay to remove it. So it was a series of things like that. Ultimately ended up about $146,000 in total change orders. The contract did include a $50,000 bonus, and I don't know if you remember this, about a year ago, we put this into the contract for a very specific reason. Working on the Sacramento River levee, we're not allowed to do work between November 1 and April 15 every year because that's flood season. We're not allowed to touch the levee when the Sacramento River could flood. We're not allowed to work in the river prior to July 1 every year because that's fish spotting season and bird nesting season. On the other side of the levee, on RD 2035's canal, we're not allowed to work there between April and October because that's their irrigation season. So we ended up with a situation that really, we could never really work there. So we incentivized the contractor to basically do work between February and April, take the risk of working in the rainy season, and get that work done prior to Conway's irrigation season starting, so that way they could start irrigating per their normal schedule, and that would free up work on the river side of the work later on when we could get in there. So they were able to get that work done, so they were eligible for the bonus. So the final contract amount total is $1.473 million. Any questions on that? Next up is, this is a picture of the levee system as it exists a couple days ago. You can see the kind of the brown in the picture is the erosion matting. It's not dead grass, but the new grass is starting to grow on both the on the Sacramento River side on the left and on the RD 2035 canal side on the right. So it's looking pretty good for early January. So hopefully that will fill in over the next month or so, and we can close the permits out. There's another picture of landscaping. Left-hand side is right next to the plant. We actually did do some irrigated landscape there. And the right side is looking north from the intake, basically just a flat piece of ground between County Road 117 and the river. You can kind of see some of the boulders on the far left side next to that white little shack, some of the boulders that we put in. Moving on to supplemental water. So you may remember we did do a purchased water agreement with the city of West Sacramento in October. We had prepaid for 1,000 acre-feet of water, reserved 2,000 acre-feet, and we did actually use 705 acre-feet of the water. There was a Term 91 curtailment that went into effect from November 15th through November 30th this year. And those things it was very good we had this in place, because when these things come out, what happens is on November 15th, the state said, stop diverting water immediately. And that's it. There's no advance notification, no public warning of any kind. It's just stop diverting water from the river. So because we had this in place, we were able to simply switch to this purchased water right and continue the plant in our normal operations. There was absolutely no hiccup in terms of water supply at all because we had this in place. We just simply added to that account for documenting use of the water. We are working with both ESA and the City of West Sacramento on a purchase agreement for 2019 and beyond. We're in discussions with them right now on a 2019 agreement, but also adding conditions that would allow us to extend it beyond just 2019, so we don't have to necessarily try to do a new contract every year and a new environmental document every year. We're hopeful that we'll have that work completed and brought to the board ideally in April for approval. We're looking to try to get this done a little bit more ahead of time this year than last year. Any questions on water purchasing? The next thing is actually interesting news. The federal EPA had requested the State Water Resources, had asked the State Water Resources Control Board if they had a water agency that they recommended as a kind of a model water agency for basically stress testing against several different aspects of climate change. The State Water Board recommended us, mainly because we have a new surface water intake, surface water treatment plant. Woodland has ASR wells, Davis has deep aquifer wells. The state felt that our agency in our cities would fare very well against stress testing against climate change. So they recommended us to the federal EPA. They agreed. So we're now basically the poster child for EPA upcoming training on a tool that they're putting out for water utilities to test themselves against future problems. And the intent of it really is to help what kind of capital improvements in the short term and long term would a water utility need to make sure that they can deal with things like extended hot weather, drought, fires, that kind of stuff.
May I ask, Tim, were other states submitting potential model projects as well, or was it strictly California?
I think it's just us, because from what I understand, we're actually working with the EPA in Washington, D.C. on this training program. So I think we're the national model, actually. So we'll be, when they roll this training out, we'll be the utility that's tested for their entire program. So we're not only getting, so it's a really good, a good compliment for our project, for our entire team, really, that we're kind of getting not only just statewide recognition, but also some national recognition on what we've built. There is a YouTube video on the bottom. That is a link to the EPA's kind of marketing for this tool that they're rolling out. It's actually a pretty good video to watch on what they're looking to do. Any other questions on that?
I'll just comment that when Tom and I met with staff not too long ago, there was an idea that we might have some public outreach from the staff of the Clean Water Agency to our respective communities, talking about some of the awards we've won and also some of the interesting aspects of the day-to-day operations. So perhaps the Woodland-Davis City Council meeting or a Davis City Council meeting pretty soon that you guys might be coming and presenting some of these awards.
Yes. Yeah, we're working through looking at what days will work for us.
A bit of a wrinkle is the fact that the federal government is in shutdown mode. So the question is whether EPA should be the first to make the announcement and then we repeat it, or we jump their gun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you have a thought on that? I don't know.
Yeah, the training was originally scheduled for April, and we were supposed to start working on this in early January, so I don't know what the schedule is right now. With that, I'll turn it over to Stan to talk about the operations side.
Thank you, Tim. So just real quick, typical operations. So in December, looking at about 13.5 million being produced daily. Woodland taking 8, Davis and UCD about 5.5. Plant continued to meet all contractual requirements as well as regulatory requirements. No unplanned shutdowns or outages. And the operations staff has begun to do their annual maintenance activities. I have a picture here, next slide of that. And then also the monthly reports to both us and the Department of Drinking Water. And then, as usual, all of the diversion quantities and water quality data is on the website. That 8.1 of Woodland's daily value, they're putting about roughly 3.7 million gallons a day into their aquifer storage wells to save for summer use. And we don't have the pictures on this slide. So interesting, It's okay. So we have pictures somewhere. I'll send them to you via email. So we did have one issue. Oh, yes, they're on your packet pictures, not in this one. So the one issue we did have, and it's ongoing, and I think we brought it to your attention last time. We had one pump at the joint intake pulled to replace the seals, which is a regular maintenance activity, and we did find some additional damage and wear on the pump, primarily due to sediment and sand from the Sacramento River, which is, again, common. As if you drive over the Sacramento River now, you can see what's in the water there. So we're working with CH, the pump manufacturers, and also the maintenance vendor of those pumps to see if ultimately we've identified the problem. We want to see what ultimately the solution is. We are repairing that first pump. CH is, or Jacobs is repairing that first pump to the tune of about $30,000 because we need to get that back in service while we ascertain what the long-term fix or solution might be. So likely we'll be coming back and providing some more information at the next board meeting on that. And that's it for operations.
So any questions for, we'll open it up for public comment. Should there be any public comment on this item? All right, well, thank you for the updates, Stan and Tim. We'll move on to item 4, fiscal year 2018-19 budget update.
Hey, just a quick budget update of where we are. So mainly a snapshot in time. The thing we look at is the actual numbers through the end of November and then estimated through the end of December, and kind of give us a picture looking ahead from January through June to see are there any changes that we I'm sorry about that. Basically, it's kind of a checkpoint in time to see how are we doing on our budget with what we spent over the past 6 months and looking ahead to the next 6 months. You may recall we have a fiscal year 19 budget of $20.12 million. Within that, $923,000 is capital, and that's related to the joint intake project, and the other $19.2 million is our operating budget. I kind of mentioned to basically is the actuals through November 30th, anticipated through the end of December, and then projection through the end of fiscal 19. On the capital budget side, we are a little bit over our budget on that in a few areas. One of them, about $131,000 over what was planned for the joint intake construction through a couple of reasons. One of them is change orders. We had a few more than expected change orders, and also the bids themselves were a bit higher than what we were originally anticipating. And I think that's a lot of that was really due to the nature of the work. We took a project that was roughly 95% complete, took those plans and specs, essentially highlighted them, took them to the new contractors and said, finish the work. So in the nature of doing that, we do find some things, we're built a little bit differently than what we had thought, and did find a few surprises like a 110-year-old well in the middle of the levee that we had to deal with. So it's not entirely unexpected when a project's put together that way. We did have about $48,000 in joint intake permit compliance and closeout costs. That's actually on the agenda today. That's the ESA amendment a little bit further down. Really about half of that is due to biological monitor during construction. The work that we did on the RD 2035 canal between the months of February and April this year, that was done outside of giant garter snake active season, meaning the snakes are hibernating at that time. Our permit required us to have a biological monitor on site 8 hours a day, every day the contractor was working. That was not in our consultant's original scope of works. We get to pay for that. And then the other half is permit closure activities. There's quite a few things we need to do to close out the permits. I think I mentioned the Central Valley Flood Protection Board permit has at least 58 different items. We need to make sure all of them are completed. And the next one is we're a little bit over budget on the construction management side of things. There was a lot of additional work primarily related to geotechnical oversight, mainly working in the Sacramento River levee itself, especially when we came across this wall. We had to analyze what do you do with the wall, how do you get rid of it, how do you repair the levee. There's quite a bit of geotechnical investigation work we required, both to deconstruct the levee and rebuild it, and also verify that that the canal, that half of the culvert that remained, that we filled that full of concrete to make sure we truly completely filled that full of concrete. There was a lot of work to make sure that we didn't have any air gaps anywhere in this pipe. It was a concrete pipe that we filled full of concrete, so it was a bit of work to try to prove to the state that yes, it was filled full of concrete. Overall, the capital budget, Most of that's actually covered by the contingency that we had in place. We had a $175,000 contingency. It's a little bit more than that, but really we feel it's close enough that there's no request to adjust the capital budget. On the operating budget side of things, we have a couple things that are under and a couple things that are over. The net is that we're under budget. We're about $193,000 under what was budgeted for electricity. That's mainly due to Term 91 being in place earlier and longer than what we had originally planned on. We do our planning in March of every year. I think we had estimated a 4-month Term 91. It ended up being a little over 5 months this year. Because of that, we have to run the plant at a lower production rate to make sure that it lasts throughout the duration of the summer. So that saved us some electricity costs. We have not really used any of the operations contingency, so that money is all still in the budget. We did have a budget line item in there for studies to support water security, and that's something that we haven't used, but it's something that we could use to start a study to manage risks to surface water supply. I think the last time this was done was about 10 years ago, and at least from our perspective, things have changed in the last couple of years. So you may want to look at what are our risks, how do we manage those risks going forward? Not necessarily something that we would try to implement tomorrow, but more 5 years, 10 years out. What should be our long-term plan? And the other item right now is showing as a decrease, but property taxes, it looks like, again, we will be paying the April installments. That probably will change actually a little bit. But we are expecting to get property tax money back after we settle the issue completely. The main thing that increased on the budget side of things is water purchase. We had not directly budgeted for water purchase this last year. The water purchase in total cost us $61,000, was $50,000 for the water and $11,000 for preparing and drafting the agreement. We're looking to do that again this year, so that will likely fall in this fiscal year rather than the next fiscal year. So that's why it's 122 rather than 61. We're expecting the future cost to be the same as the past one. In conclusion, the operations budget, we're not proposing any changes. Basically, keep things as they are, and it looks like we should come in a little bit under, and we'll make that adjustment as we typically do in Q2 of the following budget year. Any question on the budget?
Do we have any questions? So on the slide 5, the $150,000 for studies to support water supply security, and you mentioned the possible use of those funds to manage risks to surface water supply. Is that sort of the study of the water portfolio? Is it
Yes.
risks in terms of timing and availability and things like that?
Yes. Yeah, take kind of a fresh look at our water supply portfolio and make sure that we can deliver water year-round.
And so I think the way this item is agendized and the way this operating budget has been laid out, I think we could give some direction at this point if we feel like we would like staff to have these funds available and actually potentially make use of them to start looking at our water portfolio, right? And
yes.
maybe you could just kind of give a real thumbnail description of what that would mean in terms of looking at our water portfolio.
Okay.
Stan or Tim, just so we are clear on what we might be asking you to use these funds for.
Sure. Yeah, I can start, and then Stan can help fill in. So basically, the agency has 2 water rights. We have our 45,000 acre-foot State Water Board water right, which is usable year-round, except it is subject to Term 91. Historically, Term 91 would be in effect generally from June to August, maybe July to September, depending on actual flows in the river plus diversions from the river. And to plug that gap, the agency also has a Central Valley project right, 10,000 acre-feet water right, which is usable only from April 1 to October 31 every year, and not outside of that. When the analysis was done 10 years ago, the risk of Term 91 extending either prior to April 1 or after October 31 had never happened. It was viewed to be something that could happen, but a very remote risk. What we've seen in the past 6 years, Term 91 has been outside of that time frame in 4 of the last 6 years. And it seems to be 2 things have happened. Maybe rain is starting to come later in the year. Maybe the State Water Board is more conservative than they have been in the past, or some combination of the 2. But what we've seen in reality, though, is that in 4 of the last 6 years, we've had a Term 91 curtailment, which would have precluded us from pumping any water from the river. We mitigated this year with a water purchase agreement. The three times prior, we were in construction, so we didn't really have to worry about it at that time. But I think going forward, it's likely to be an annual risk for us. There are a few other things going on, kind of statewide really, in terms of water supply that do or could pose some risk to the agency if implemented, and that's this unimpaired flow approach that the State Water Board is considering. They did vote to do that on the San Joaquin system on December 12th. They are considering the Sacramento River system at some point this year. I don't know the exact date. But there is a working group working on an alternative solution that may be implemented. So those things together both are relatively new risks to the agency that we hadn't really had when the portfolio was analyzed 10 years ago.
Can I?
Yes, go ahead, Camille.
So following on this and the presentation that you made earlier about the EPA's climate resiliency tool, would this, if we were to go forward with some additional risk analysis and studies under this money, would that bolster our case with the EPA? Would it be a best practice? Would we be demonstrating that we're thinking about the stress testing and preparing ourselves for the future?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, because that's basically what that program is looking for, is how do you protect yourself against any kind of scenario that would be likely. One of these is more, I don't know, political or than climate related, but the unimpaired flow approach is a little bit different than what would be analyzed in terms of climate, because it's not a climate related thing, but it is a risk to our agency.
So, yeah, please go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, we entered in. The contract we did in 2018 was a one-time contract. It was 2,000 acre-feet of water based on availability. Going forward, we're in preliminary negotiations with them now on basically not just a one-year contract, but something that could be renewed without having to do a lot of effort to renew it. And it'll be subject to different things. Is the water available in the river? If it's a critical year in Central Valley, the Bureau of Reclamation, if they do cut water supplies, that water may not be available to us. So they may not have it to sell. And we also have to want to buy it that year. So it'll be conditional multi-year contract. Actually, no. They have to pay, their water rate is a bit different than ours. That they have to pay reclamation for that water rate whether or not they use it. So they have X acre feet and they pay for X acre feet. If they don't use that, they still pay for it. They charged us their cost this year, their cost with no markup of any kind. So for them, it was really a pass-through. We're helping basically mitigate unused water. They could mark it up if they wanted to. But because we're partner agencies, we're friends, they did not mark it up for us.
But to follow up on that question, if I may, in future contracts, or were we to enter into a longer-term agreement, that may be part of the agreement, potentially?
Potentially. There, just to give you kind of a quick flavor of what other agencies, we were talking with a different water agency earlier last year. They were talking in the neighborhood of $400 an acre foot. We paid $50. So even if there is a bit of a markup that's higher than what we paid last year, is probably a lot better than $400.
And it's also, by us purchasing this, it's also helping West Sac maintain the beneficial use clause of their water rights. So
yes, we're firming up their demand.
Yeah.
Yes.
Correct. And as in addition, filling whatever gap they may have in their use, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, like I mentioned, they pay for that water whether or not they use it. And if Bureau of Reclamation determines that they never use that water, eventually it could be taken away. So we're helping them avoid that fate. So
I think there's a general consensus that, as listed on the presentation, that we would like to have this money available if needed, should you want to begin studying the water portfolio during this next 6-month period.
Okay.
If not, I'm sure we'll come back to us in the following year's budget. Any other questions? Will, you look like you want to ask
Are you
something.
seeking action? Is
No,
there action needed?
I think yeah,
Okay.
right.
If the contract ends up being, the contract for doing the study ends up being over $50,000, it'll come back to the board for approval.
Is that sufficient, just the general, right? So we're not,
Yep.
or we
Yes.
could take official action if you would like.
No, we don't need to. No.
Yeah, so, all right. let's see. I don't recall if I did public comment on this item. I don't believe I did. Is any public comment? Seeing none, we will now move on to item 5. Discussion concerning UC Davis request to become a party to the agency Joint Powers Agreement. Do we have a staff presentation, or is this really just an agenda item listing so that we can have the discussion where Camille has mentioned a few times before under the long-range calendar portion that they would like us to consider amending the agreement so that the city of UC Davis would have a voting seat on the board?
Yes, there's not a staff presentation on this item. It's really up to the board to have an open discussion on the topic.
So I'll just open it up. I would basically just describe this on several separate occasions. Camille asked whether we could have a discussion as to whether UC Davis might have a voting seat on the board. Currently, they're a board member, much like the county of Yolo has a board seat, but they're non-voting board seats. And so why don't we just turn it over to Camille? I see a couple UC Davis representatives. If they would like to make public comment or be available for the discussion, we will be flexible.
Thank you so much. Yes, I have Matt Dulcich and Kirsten Stevenson from UC Davis here, and hopefully you'll be willing to entertain them pinch hitting for correcting me if I make any misstatements. So first, UC Davis would like to say thank you to the board and to staff for setting up this agenda item. And if you don't mind, I'd like to go through a few points of kind of making our explanation for why we've been asking for this. We'd like to start out by thanking you for providing strong guidance and management through the first major phase of this agency's work to construct the intake and treatment facility, which has put us all on a solid path for a resilient and collaborative future. We see our request to discuss joining the agency as a fully vested partner as further indicating our interest in and willingness to collaborate with our YOLO partners. We've demonstrated our willingness with our active participation in the YOLO Groundwater Sustainability Agency, our work on the YOLO Resiliency Planning Group, membership in the YOLO Climate Compact, our participation in the jointly held water right and this project, however bumpy that participation may have been over the years, and many other examples of collaboration with other YOLO agency and jurisdictional partners. Although at the campus, it was always contemplated that at some point we might prefer a voting seat, UC previously elected not to participate in this agency in a decision-making way, deliberately to ensure that the two cities, both significantly larger stakeholders with much larger financial ramifications at stake during construction, were able to navigate the construction phase and those decisions for the project most efficiently and through consensus. It was our intent then to promote consensus decision-making, and that remains our intent now. Now the project is constructed, and it has moved into its long-term operational phase. As we hear in the last year, nearly every meeting has been largely focused on operational concerns with minor construction matters. This move into the long-term operational phase is where the operational and financial risks are borne by all of the parties who are party to this water right and using this water. All three of us as parties have constituents drinking this water, and we all three have deeply vested interests in collaborating to deliver adequate and safe water to our constituents. At the campus, we have hundreds of millions of dollars of research that can be impacted by water quality changes, such as happens when we experience curtailment and a reversion to higher proportions of groundwater on campus. As well, we have a daily population of nearly 50,000 people who depend on us to deliver adequate and safe water. This board, the Clean Water Agency Board, and the agency management have transitioned into a very different role now, from construction and its major financial implications for the two cities, to a shared operation-focused role with a co-owned water right and a mutual interest in water supply resiliency. Thus, we feel it now makes sense for UC, which is also a party to the project, to participate in a meaningful and transparent way that reflects this maturing of the roles, responsibilities, and the relationship that we enjoy together. We propose to become a fully vested member of the Joint Powers Agreement, and we would suggest that for this discussion today and any actions that might result from this discussion, that we separate joining the JPA with a voting seat from voting structure. UC brings extensive expertise to the operations of the project, and its vote on critical board decisions would ensure that expertise is part of the decision-making in a formalized way. UC's formal participation would further enable the JPA to make appropriate use of UC resources and assistance for the foreseeable future. Finally, we feel that all three of us belonging to the JPA strengthens further water rights applications, should we have those, and also helps us collectively better protect our existing mutually held rights and assets. Again, in closing, we would like to express that we are very appreciative of the board entertaining this discussion, and we appreciate the concept of first collaborating together to discuss this idea, and then, if appropriate, to consider an action item at the April board meeting or other future meeting as appropriate.
So I have a question. Are your colleagues here as a resource, or do they also wish to make some statements regarding this item?
I think they're mainly here as resources, but I would like to see if there's anything I haven't covered that they would like to jump in and add.
Yeah, so why don't we open it up for public comment on this item? You don't necessarily have to make a public comment. You know, if we do have questions, you know, we'll hopefully you're willing to answer questions for clarification.
Sure. And I was just going to say, my presence here, Matt Dulcich with Government Relations from the campus, and Kirsten Stevenson from Campus Council, really just here to participate in the listening and the discussion, to be a resource if issues come up where we think we could provide some insight. We're happy to do that, but wanted to just let the board, with Camille's help, lead the discussion, see what the interests and the issues are, and mostly listen and be part of it in that way. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And while we're at it, any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment portion of this item. So, colleagues, do we have any questions of staff or of Camille in terms of, yes, Tom?
Camille, I really value the fact that you're at this board and you bring a great perspective. What do you feel the issue of having a vote would add to your being here that you don't presently have? I mean, do you feel less respected because you don't have a vote? Or is there anything short of that? Because the voting formula as it presently exists was a negotiation, and both the cities had a lot on the line when they undertook to create this agency and to bring it to the point we're at today. So it kind of opens a number of, I won't say a can of worms, but it brings a lot of questions to us in terms of what would happen. I mean, so do you feel that you don't have a fair shake here as a user of the water of this district?
I think
JPA.
very, very good questions. I think we certainly feel respected, and we're delighted to be part of this. I think from our perspective, we see this as it's kind of like we've been, and pardon this metaphor, it's a little like we've been living together, and now we're asking to get married. And essentially, it's because of the relationship has matured and the operational role has matured. And in many ways, we're all now in it for the operations and we would like to have a formal vote. We do not in any way want to impair the consensus seeking and consensus decision making that has been historically the way that this has operated. So we would, I think, want to have those conversations separate from joining the JPA about a voting structure that can ensure that we are still helping maintain that consensus basis. I think from our perspective, what matters here with joining formally is that there's additional transparency that we can demonstrate to our, as public stewards who are spending money on this, that we are actively participating with a formal vote in a formal agency, and and making sure that we're participating not equally, but in a formal voting structure with those decisions so that they're recorded for the public and they demonstrate that we are equally vested in being part of operational success and resiliency for this partnership and all three of our agencies.
Well, you know, I think I certainly have no desire to see the university as any less engaged here with or without a vote, because the university is highly respected. I mean, it's the major economic driver in the region. We all know that. We are so grateful for it. But perhaps take a moment and look at it, I'll just say from the Woodland perspective, let others speak for the Davis perspective. We see you basically as part of the Davis apportionment. As you know, we're not 50-50 in what we take from the plant. Woodland felt its needs were slightly greater than Davis felt, so we're paying percentage-wise based on what we take. And the 1.8 million gallons per day is coming out of the Davis allocation. And, you know, I obviously represent the ratepayers of Woodland. And they're on the hook for a lot of money. I mean, we're on a loan. Not only did we put the JPA together and build the plant and deal with amazing political challenges over a sustained period of years, but we have a long-term liability that we're on it, you're not on it. So I guess what I'm saying is I sort of feel like we would never want to be in a situation where the university and Davis could outvote Woodland on any issue coming before this body, and I wouldn't expect Davis to ever want a situation where we allied and outvoted them on an issue. I just don't think that would be healthy, and it's not respectful of the fact that the real ownership is those who built it and paid for it. So it's sort of a representation without the taxation aspect, it seems to me at this point, even though you're a ratepayer, I don't disagree with that. And on a long-term basis, your needs may change for water, and you may see other solutions, but I don't see us being any less collaborative. I mean, I feel there's a sort of a all for one and one for all here. You know, we want everybody's needs to be met. But I sort of feel like our vote is based on what has gone before, even if it's passed. The liability's not gone. We're on the hook for I don't know what it is, $145 million?
For the agency side, $108 million, $103 million.
Thank you. Anyway, so it presents quite a complication from my point of view, and I thought about it a lot because you've asked for this, and I hadn't thought about it until you brought it up. But I couldn't see this happening without a vote of our council, for one thing. And I don't know why they would feel compelled to do this, but at the same time, I want you to know it's not meant as any disrespect, because we rely on the expertise of people from UC all the time. You're one of the most informed people.
Right, and I think that's part of what we bring to the agency that strengthens it. We would, by joining the JPA, would clarify roles and responsibilities both internally but also externally much more. I think it would strengthen the relationship. It would make it clearer how we participate by bringing resources and knowledge. And I fully appreciate, we fully appreciate at the campus that the cities are far more financially on the hook. That is why we elected not to advocate for a voting seat in the formation of the JPA, because we fully understood that our little sliver was a little sliver. That said, we do have hundreds of millions of dollars of research on the line for water quality that is reliant on what happens if we go into curtailment, what happens if the water supply is disrupted, what happens if we have some sort of political upheaval or dissolution of the agency that causes some sort of structural problems with the water rights. We are very much in this too, and we have made investments, infrastructure investments, capital investments on the campus to enable us to take this water. So we very much feel we're in for this. We watched the discussion with the potential for Yolo County to join as a voting seat and saw how there was thoughtful construction of a possible voting structure. We're not proposing any voting structure right now. We are just leaving this solely, we would like solely to ask the question now about joining the JPA and separating the how does the voting structure then protect all parties fairly and in mind of the kinds of investments that have been made and the kinds of political and financial risks that have been undertaken. But we also feel that the organization has matured in relationship, responsibilities, and roles at this point that this does become a question that we wanted to ask. And we fully appreciate and understand that we are asking the board for something that they have to take back to their councils.
I also wonder if you feel like you may have interests which are different from the cities, in which case, if you did, that might be an additional concern of mine at this point. But I would want, for the most part, to make sure that we're responsive, because you're essentially a very large customer, even if it's a sliver. It's a big sliver.
Yes.
And, for example, the decision to buy water from West Sacramento was made because we learned that if we reintroduce untreated groundwater into our pipes, it raises havoc with our system, and it'll cost us a tremendous amount of money to re-clean the systems, deal with color issues, odor issues, and the like. So the chemistry of it is such that I see that interest should be consistent with yours.
Right.
If you need to purify the water beyond what we deliver to you, you'll have to deal with that.
Right. We understand that. Yeah, I mean, exactly. So we are actually right now preparing communications pieces on campus to help our researchers understand what happens during Term 91 curtailment and what might happen with water quality on campus and how might that impair or impact research and what can we do to mitigate that. So we very much are vested, very vested in this groundwater supply. I think, again, I want to separate out joining the JPA and having a formal role here that has a voting role that has that kind of clarity and transparency that goes with it from what that voting structure might look like that protects all the parties. I guess you asked, do we feel like we're not equally consulted or equally part of things? There have been some decisions that have come before this board in the past year that felt that they were a bit more settled when they landed at the board, so there was less room and opportunity for the university to have input on our perspective on those things. The general manager, the way we handled the move on the general manager, while I think it's been absolutely wonderful and positive, and I don't think would have recommended something differently, definitely did not have a part in the discussion in how that transpired. Yet we do live with the operational structure. So I think that's just one example. And again, there's no sense of feeling disrespected.
I'm glad to hear that.
We really enjoy, I personally really enjoy these meetings and I learn a lot at them. So both from my fellow board members and from staff. So it's really us seeking to just explore whether the relationship has matured to a point that we could join and it would make sense for all of us.
So, go ahead, Will.
Thank you. I appreciate the way that this is coming forward. So I think this is, and you alluded to it in your comments, Camille, I think this is the right way to do it, to lead with this discussion and then find a way, should action be appropriate, to take that action in the future. I also want to go maybe one step further than what Director Stallard said regarding our cooperation and appreciation for the university. It's my belief that we are just beginning a new era of cooperation between, at least I can speak for the city of Davis and the university. Highlights being, of course, this agreement that was reached regarding the long-range development plan. I think that was a very incredibly positive step toward a better relationship between the two entities. And I'll just take this opportunity, there will be other opportunities to do so, but to thank the university for the efforts that they've made over just the last few days to facilitate this huge memorial service that is taking place on campus tomorrow morning. I gather that the university has really gone above and beyond, and so that is absolutely appreciated from the city side. So I also recognize, although I maybe wasn't able to put it into words, but after Camille described it, that there are, one could argue, two phases, and that perhaps university participation prior to our entering the current phase would not have been appropriate, and that this is, though, a different phase. I recognize that, but I also recognize what Tom said, and am on record when we were discussing the issue of the potential for the county to join, of being very concerned about any potential effect that may have on what is a heavily negotiated balancing act that we have here between the two members of the JPA. I was not on the council, of course, at the time when it was formed. However, I was very steeped in the politics, at least in Davis, and it was incredibly contentious. And so finding a governing structure that has worked over the last few years, I'm sure was not easy to do at the beginning, and I think provides us with some comfort on both among all folks who are receiving this this water, that these decisions cannot be made in anything resembling unilaterally. And I think it would very much concern me to have any entity have a sole fifth vote, just an equal fifth vote. I think would potentially create scenarios where one city essentially would create a scenario in my mind where something could move forward with this agency despite unanimous opposition from one city or another. I think that would be a deal breaker for me, frankly. I know there's a hope that we could bifurcate the discussion about voting structure from this discussion about participation, although I think participation to me would be predicated on some level of comfort that there was a voting structure in place that helped protect us from that scenario happening, where one city could be opposed to something and yet it still goes forward, because as it stands currently, that's impossible. That would be my chief concern, and a concern that were it not addressed sufficiently in my mind, that I would not be able to move forward like this. But it sounds like there's a recognition of that fact among all directors, as well as from the university. And so this is a difficult issue for me. I'm very reluctant to mess with the program at all. And so that's my starting point, but with full recognition that we're both in a different phase and that there are significant things at stake for the university here.
Thanks, Will. Rich?
I'm new to the agency, so my comments will be a little bit reflective of I'm new to the agency. And it's what I do believe, though, is that the heavy lifting's done. And that was done at a significant expense to the governing boards of Davis and to Woodland. As a resident of Woodland, I looked at this when the project was first raised, with a jaundiced eye. You want to spend what? For water? Are you serious? And it has significantly raised the rates of water in Woodland. I don't know what it's done in Davis, but I'm assuming it's impacted rates in Davis as well. So
The university pays for it. No, I'm just kidding.
I do understand that Davis is a significant role player in the community, both economically and all the other things that you folks do. And I appreciate you being a customer, because I think that's helpful to the agency. But I view the university at this point as a customer, and one that wants to hop on the train at this point. And I'm not sure of the background, Camille, if the university was invited at the outset. And if the university was invited at the outset and didn't get on then you gave up the risk. And if you give up the risk, you also give up the benefit. So I also understand the construct of this board is somewhat unique. You don't see too many even member boards out there for a reason. And I think that the construct of this board was 2 members for each city on purpose. It was a good design, and it's been working. My time that I've spent with the agency, with Stan and with Tim, I'm impressed by the level of expertise these folks bring to bringing water to our communities. That being said, I'm willing to listen. And I did hear what you bring to the table, what you bring as a university. I also hear what you need to protect, all that millions of dollars of research, certainly, and I respect that. But I'm a little concerned about upsetting the balance at this point, but I'm still willing to listen.
So I think this is a good starting discussion. I think what might be helpful for all of us, Camille mentioned a couple of potential positives. If they were a party to the JPA, Dick, you might have to help me with the exact phrasing of this, but would there be potential benefits as we are dealing with some of the statewide entities, or there was something reference of water rights and things of that. So maybe just so we have are able to have a more fully informed discussion when this comes back, and I think this could be something that does come back to us for a little more further discussion. Staff, maybe you could help us and better understand, maybe we're missing some potential benefits by having UC Davis more formally part of this agreement. I don't know whether there is anything, but I don't know. I imagine UC Davis, I do know that they have some independent water rights not related to this agency. I don't know what that means in terms of them more directly joining this agency, but maybe there could be a little bit of research to help us better understand. Maybe there's something a benefit that we're not directly seeing. Camille, is this, do you want to talk more, or are you okay putting this on a future agenda for further discussion as we gather maybe a little more information?
I think that would be great, and I really appreciate that, Brett. I think we are happy we've kind of made a case. We would be happy to provide more information. Definitely look forward to seeing more come forward from staff on how we could add benefit to the agency, and welcome further discussion. So thank you very much.
My colleague is okay with ending this discussion item kind of essentially here. Staff, you comfortable at this point if we close this item?
Yes. Yeah, and we can work with UC Davis and with the water rights attorney on if there was a benefit with the other water right that may be available, and the other potential benefits.
Sure. Okay, well, thank you very much, and if you let us know as you gather more information, we can figure out when to agendize sort of the follow-up discussion. So why don't we move on to item 6, consider acceptance of completed intake completion project work and authorize final payment.
I did talk about this a little bit earlier in the update. Lister Construction was the contractor. They did complete the work in November of 2018, and they did completely close out all the punch list items. They did make the incentive eligibility for the $50,000 bonus that we put into the contract. From our perspective, they did completely do the work. They did a very good job for us, and we're recommending accepting the project as complete and release of retention.
Let's open it up for public comment on this item. Seeing none, let's move it to discussion. Anybody willing to make a motion on this item?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Moving right along, item 7, consider approval of contract amendment with ESA.
Yes, there's a contract amendment for a little over $47,000 with ESA Associates. They have been the agency's environmental consultant since 2010. They actually worked for the agency prior to the agency even existing. They did the EIR back in 2007 for the agency. So they've been a long-term consultant. I mentioned this a little bit in the update as well. This contract amendment is really covering 2 areas related to the joint intake. One half of it roughly is for the biological monitor that we had to have on site every day, 8 hours a day during the work conducted between February and April to make sure that the sleeping snakes were not disturbed. And then the other half is to assist us with closeout of our 8 permits.
That's a lot of money to make sure those snakes get their rest.
It does. He had to work on a Saturday a few times. It was, yes. No snakes they were not disturbed during construction. They were fine. And then the other half of it roughly is the assistance with the closeout of the 8 permits that we have on the joint intake project.
Public comment? Seeing none. I'll entertain a motion to approve the item, although I sense Will can't resist the sleeping snakes.
Is this a wildlife protection thing, or is this a safety thing with the snakes?
It's well, safety for the snakes.
Okay.
It's for the giant garter snake. They're a listed species.
There you go. That's what I was getting at. Okay. We don't want to touch the snakes because, okay.
I'm going to second Will's motion.
Yeah, that
he's
was a
about to make.
motion, obviously.
All those in favor of approving task order number 8 for consultant services with ESA, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we're moving on.
Let sleeping snakes lie.
Yeah. Hopefully.
So item 8, clarify agency policy regarding applicability of purchasing policy.
And Brett, I'm going to cover this item, and this is a business housekeeping item that follows up on the last item, which was a $47,000 contract amendment. And when the question came to staff about whether or not the ESA contract amendment had to go to this board for approval, staff was caught betwixt and between because our current purchasing procurement policy doesn't clearly answer the question because the manager has the authority to approve contracts and spend money up to $50,000, but it really doesn't talk about contract amendments. And so in an excess of caution, we thought it would be advisable to come to the board and get some policy direction from you guys about whether or not you want to see contract amendments like this in the future, to give us some guidance on how you'd like to construe and apply your procurement policy to these contract amendments. And there's a staff report that provides the background. And at the bottom of the staff report, I kind of break it out into 3 situations that might have different policy implications. One is a contract amendment of less than $50,000 to a contract you've already approved. That's an example of that is the ESA amendment you just approved. Another example might be when you're approving a contract amendment to a less than $50,000 contract amendment where the amendment plus the underlying contract are still under $50,000. The third example is the amendment puts the total contract amount over that $50,000 threshold. And we're just looking for some policy direction on to what extent the board would like to see these various contract amendments coming to you for consideration and approval versus authorizing the general manager to approve.
Yeah, so I'll just say that I appreciate in your staff report the 3 variations because I was starting to read it and thought, sort of came up with 2 of the 3. My thinking, I don't know whether my colleagues are thinking the same way, but to me it was no, no, yes. essentially, if we voted on something to add something in addition to less than 50,000, I don't need to see that again. To me, that's kind of under that 50,000. Two agreements under 50,000 in total, I probably don't need to see that. But when we start to go above, right? So in this last one, imagine that next week they say, ESA says, oh, you know, there's another 10,000. So the danger would be somebody trying to game the system in terms of staying under that 50,000 and, you know, having a series of $30,000 sort of individual things that add up to, you know, something far and above. But no, I appreciate you listing the different possible scenarios in the staff report. Colleagues?
Yes, I would weigh in exactly the same. No, no, yes. And, you know, I think, as Camille pointed out, we're kind of moving along we're in calmer waters these days, fewer issues that need to be considered. And I think because we only meet quarterly, it's really good for us to kind of keep an eye on things like this. So I appreciate your erring towards and consulting us than acting with the total independence where you have the time and can. So I think 50,000 is a good limit for your independent authority.
Camille?
Yeah, Camille.
I would agree with both of you. It's a good use of everybody's efficiency and time not to do things that are under 50.
Okay. Will, Rich?
No, that was my read of the report as well. And
So before we vote, any public comment? Seeing none, anybody want to make a motion to make this more clear? Or are you just basically looking for informal direction? I mean, we could make
I
this
think
into
staff,
a motion.
we can take this in informal direction, and my thought was just to memorialize it for the future. We'll just add that to your procurement policy and bring that in a future consent agenda item,
Okay.
and we'll memorialize it that way.
Okay, well, thank you. So we'll move on to item 9.
That was item, no, not reserve.
Agency reserve
Yep.
policy.
Thank you. Yeah, so a brief presentation on this, and then we'd be asking for a couple of actions. You know, per the JP, as in the staff report, per the JPA agreement, you know, the agency establishes prudent reserves. In the past, as we were more heavily on the capital side of procuring the project, that was at $10 million, subsequently lowered to $3 million as we got further into the operational phase. Now that we're fully in the operational phase, staff is recommending that we lower that $3 million down to about $1.5 million. With a couple different criteria providing that, you know, $1.5 million number. The two main ones is typically we do a variable, there's a variable cost to our contract. A lot of our contract terms are fixed, but about $2.2 million of the amount is variable. We're recommending about 4 months of that be allocated as reserves, which would be roughly a little over $700,000. And then the other aspect would be FEMA actually recommends 2% to 3% of your assets as a reserve. When we take our portion of the intake as a reserve, that 2% equates to roughly about $700,000 as well. When we put those together, we get a little under 1.5 million. Just to make it simplistic, we're looking at 1.5. The reason we did not include the total assets of the agency is the likelihood of all of our assets being damaged significantly at one point. We didn't feel we would have to add on, you know, on top of each asset, as they're located in different regions, and they're also just separate from that. So the likelihood of all of it being damaged at once, we and a lot of other agencies would probably be in a significant issue beyond what the reserves would cover at that point. The other fact I'd like to bring to attention is, you know, this reserve, 1.5 million, may seem a bit low, frankly, for a utility as a reserve. You know, Davis itself, we carry a little over 10 million as a reserve target. I'm not sure what Woodland carries as from a water fund reserve target. The aspect of this is a JPA, so we have with board action, the 1.5 million is essentially the amount that staff feels would be appropriate for us to engage and start to make repairs on a capital or a catastrophic issue. And then we would have that time to come to the board essentially to request either emergency funds from our partner agencies, Davis, Woodland, and UCD, and or receive some of those funds from YC Parmy, our insurance carrier. So this 1.5 million essentially is a bridge to get to the ultimate funding opportunities that might be there for us.
Thank you. Tom?
I think this is the first time in my elected service that staff has actually recommended a reduction in reserves. Usually we're being encouraged to increase reserves, but I think it sounds like you have very good reasons for doing it as relayed in the staff report and in your comments, so I would support their request.
Camille?
I think it makes sense.
Okay. Will? Rich?
Thanks to staff for bringing it up in the first place and recognizing it.
Any public comment? Seeing none, consider a motion to approve the two recommendations of staff, if I recall correctly.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We are on to item 10, long-range board calendar. Any updates to what's in our packet? Any questions regarding the long-range calendar as presented?
There are no changes to the calendar as presented in the board packet. The next meeting is currently scheduled for April 18th.
Any comments? So again, staff will let us know as you discover more information concerning the UC Davis question.
Yes.
Right? So we can appropriately agendize that
Yes.
when we get more information. And then also, Camille, the idea there is not that we're waiting for a big block of time. So if we are not discovering any additional information, feel free to email staff and my chair or vice chair to possibly agendize an item. So any discussion on this item? Keeping with the endless asking for public comment, even though there's nobody here, we will see if there's public comment. There's not. So we'll move on to item 11, technical advisory comments. Moving on to item 12, board member comments. Talkative group. Wait.
Yesterday, yesterday I had the opportunity to join Tim Bush in attending an informal session on the issue of uninterrupted flows in the Sacramento River. I don't know if everyone here knows it, but the state has pretty much announced that they're interested in dramatically increasing uninterrupted flows, unimpeded flows, whatever the term is. We're at 35% now, more or less, and they're talking about potentially 60%. Every 10% increase in unimpeded flows essentially sends 1 million acre-feet of water out to the Golden Gate. So obviously, and it's not just the Sacramento River, it's the American River, Feather River, Yuba River, and the tributaries. So this is, the word draconian is not, inappropriate in this circumstance. So what I would consider progressive group of water users is in an informal conversation to propose an alternative that would essentially feed the fish as opposed to just looking to increasing unimpeded flows as the solution to the problem, because the salmon are hungry, and flows alone will not solve the problem. Food will help solve the problem. So many of the North State rice growers, for example, are talking about flooding their lands and then discharging the flooded waters back into the rivers and streams, because the decomposition of rice produces a great deal of food for salmon, including insect life and the like. So there is actually a little YouTube video called A New Way Waterways, A New Beginning Waterways. Maybe you can send us an
Maybe
email.
a new way forward or a new beginning.
A
one
new
of
way
those two.
forward waterways. If you could send a link perhaps to everybody, it's like
Yes.
about a 5-minute video. It's very well done, and it seems like a very reasoned alternative to the more draconian approach of just saying you can't take water out of the river because we must maintain these unimpeded flows. And everybody will be severely impacted if that rule were to go forward without an alternative. So the other idea is let's find common ground and move forward as opposed to the usual cycle of litigation and stress that goes on sometimes in confrontational answers. And Tim might care to add to that. This was an all-day meeting. I mean, it went for 3 hours yesterday afternoon in Richvale.
It's actually it is a pretty large group. It's the the Northern California Water Association. It's basically every water agency from Sacramento to Shasta Lake. And there was, I think, well over 100 people in attendance, represented very heavily by water agencies, water managers, attorneys, and the like. And it's really trying to put together what they call voluntary settlement agreements. And a couple different things. From what I understand, and I don't know all the details on it, in the northern part of Sacramento River, from basically Red Bluff to the north, they would grow like phytoplankton and zooplankton in the flooded rice fields in winter, which also doubles as migratory bird habitat. That grows a ton of food, literally tons of food for the salmon. They would pump that water back into the river when the salmon need it, and down lower in the Yellow Bypass area, actually grow salmon in the Yellow Bypasses. So if they're looking to link up roughly 4,000 acres of land to grow salmon. Basically, it's the same thing, give the salmon the opportunity to essentially spread out on what kind of mimics a natural floodplain, and then to grow. They've done a lot of studies in the past 10 years, and I think UC Davis has been part of some of them, and along with CalTrout and a few others. But they've actually been able to fully document the salmon grow roughly twice as large in rice fields than they do in the natural river. And it's mainly just availability of food, less stress because there's not predators and that kind of thing. So really, it's the pretty much a unified effort from everybody on the Sacramento River to put forward a voluntary agreement on how to address basically providing habitat for salmon and food for salmon rather than letting up to 3 million acre feet of water just go out the Golden Gate Bridge. The state did approve these unimpaired flows on the San Joaquin River system. They implemented a 40% unimpaired flow there through December 12th meeting. And there's already been at least 2 lawsuits filed against it. Down there, they're actually taking somewhat of a voluntary, but also more of a litigation approach to it. And the hope is that in the Sacramento River system, our group, or the group we're a part of really, can come together and put together a voluntary approach that avoids that whole thing, that avoids the state board taking that action, which would then, of course, result in near immediate litigation.
Thank you.
You know, Tim, you didn't mention that actually one of the trials was actually held at our intake.
Yes, yeah, the CalTrout, one of the CalTrout studies, they actually put a pen, they actually hung it off of our intake to cut, and they put salmon in these little pens, and they put them in the Sacramento River, they put them in the Tule Canal, they put them into, I think it was Conaway Ranch's rice ground just south of I-5, and to look at how do salmon grow in a rice paddy, how do salmon grow in the river, how do salmon grow in the Tule Canal. And the salmon in the Sacramento River they lived, but they didn't really grow that much, but the ones in the rice field just grew more than twice as fast. So they actually used our facilities to help with their study.
Thank you. So, any motion to adjourn?
Yeah. Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Most popular vote.
Anyway, thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.